Hi, y'all West. I'm so excited that you're here today. There are thousands and thousands of you joining us. Here are my fabulous panelists. If you are in this session, it's for storytelling in a digital world. And I hope that's what you came to see. Thanks so much to our sponsors who have made this event possible. Thanks to our readers who have stuck with us through not just one, but two virtual festivals. They are sort of the worst. So we are very, very happy that we will be at Samohai again this time next spring. I want to introduce my fabulous panelists today, who you can see in all their glory. Say hi, people, and then I'll...
Hello. Hello, everyone.
You are seeing a glimpse at all of our lives, by the way. I do live in a murder room, which are my whiteboard walls.
Amazing.
Where all the magic or the very bad things happen. Okay, Charlie Jane Anders, we're very excited to have you with us today. Super famous, graced by your presence. And all of these creators are here for a reason, aside the fact that they're geniuses, but that this panel is really about how some of the most important stories we have at this moment don't just live in books, or how they migrate from books to a lot of other forms of storytelling, or migrate from a lot of other storytelling channels into books. So all of these fabulous people have worked across different medium, or came from different medium, or have worked going into different medium, which I find fascinating. So Charlie came to novels and podcasts from IO9 and from journalism, and has won 1 billion awards. You could not be more lauded or successful. Now the author of the YA novel Victories Greater Than Death, as well as the adult novels The City in the Middle of the Night and All the Birds in the Sky, which won the Nebula, Crawford, Locust Awards, Choir Boy, which won the Lambda Literary. She's written 1 million short stories and novellas, including the Hugo Award-winning 6 Months, 3 Days, the co-creator of the Hugo Award-winning podcast Our Opinions Are Correct, and I think adapting The City in the Middle of the Night for Sony with Sharon Hall of The Expanse, and have done some other writing, I think, for TV. Is any of that wrong, or do you want to, did I get it? I've never said Hugo Awards so many times in an introduction, but so yeah, so honored. Okay, Marie Lu came to fiction via video games and some form flash animating, and I know her as an artist as well as a writer, and I also know she loves games, and she's visited me in my game incubation unit when I worked at Bungie. So full nerd, I love it. Marie has multiple stories in the works as streaming content and has been called, quote, a hit factory, which is my favorite thing I think ever said about you. Marie is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of the Legend Trilogy, the Young Elites Trilogy, the Warcross series, and the Sky Hunter duology, the Kingdom of Vax standalone novel. And your bio, which I think is outdated, just notes you playing Assassin's Creed. Have you moved on from Assassin's Creed, or is that still where you are today?
I wish. I don't have as much time to game these days because of our 2-year-old, but if I did, I probably would be playing it. I don't know. I play it in my dreams.
In your dreams. I actually do dream sometimes that I fly Nintendo style, but we can talk about that later. Karen McManus came to fiction via journalism and has had incredible success. Is the #1 New York Times, USA Today International bestselling author of One of Us is Lying, Two Can Keep a Secret, One of Us is Next, and The Cousins. And we at the Yalls are familiar with Karen's rabid fandom, who come in hordes every year to see her. So thank you for that. Now One of Us is Lying was picked up to series by the Peacock channel, right? Coming out this year, right? Do you have the date? Have I missed that? Do we know when you're debuting?
We don't actually know the date yet. It's possible it could be the end of this year, but it may be next year.
Sliding. Because we've lost time. Time does not exist for us anymore here in the after times. Asha Bromfield came from acting in not 1 but 2 shows adapted from comics, Riverdale and Lock and Key, and will debut on May 4th with Hurricane Summer, that's a big congrats. We're always really excited when we have a fabulous debut in the works. So I think that's kind of amazing because you arose from being a character into creating characters. So there's like a billion things I would like to talk to you about that. And Hurricane Summer also sounds fascinating. Lewis Peterson came to novels from games and now works in transmedia IP, was a studio co-founder where he worked on a bunch of adaptations of Bruckheimer films, Marvel, Disney, DreamWorks, 20th Century Fox, HBO, Pirates of the Caribbean, Shrek, The Sopranos, Fantastic Four, Silver Surfer. Lewis is a writer, creative consultant, and is currently the co-founder of the Foundational IP Group, where we actually work together. Hello, Lewis.
Hello.
Lewis, I want you to tell us at the end of this panel how we're all our jobs will all be taken over by robots and AI in the very near future.
Okay.
That's what we'll be. Novel I wrote with Cami Garcia that became a film, becomes a bunch of things, and my most recent work was the Spider-Man Noir. And some people know me from my run on Captain Marvel or Black Widow novels. So I've moved in and out of the sort of comics and novels world, but most often work as a game consultant with Activision and Bungie and DICE and all over the place, Marvel games as well. So I have sort of a view of a bunch of different channels. And so that's really actually what this panel is about, is sort of adaptations and how we adapt stories into different stories, how we live in an age of sort of professional content consumption, and how stories now are sort of about how we consume stories. And I think it's fascinating. We worked on stories for video game campaigns that become comic books, and comic books that become movies, movies that become theme parks and mobile games and YA novels, and then YA novels that migrate to Netflix. You can watch all of that and then listen to the podcast about the making of it, and then watch the TikTok about how it made you cry. And then you can read the fanfic, like written about the streamer, who will then comment on the fanfic and then feature it on their show, right? So that's actually like the moment we live in, which I think is fascinating. I would like to start with Charlie. And also, you guys, make sure you do all the promotional work you need to do. So tell us about the novel you want us to all read, because I'm terrible at that part of this. But Charlie, it's called Sci-Fi a Portal, which I think is fascinating because we're sort of talking about portals, really, in formats in this world, right? Like a world, you know, a portal to another world. But I think all of our storytelling becomes portals to like other ways you can consume this story and ways your readers can create stories made out of your story. So tell me what you think about kind of like the places, the stories you tell are meant to sort of take us to.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a really fun ride the last few years. I've been working in some TV writing rooms, but also I'm doing a little bit of comics work. I actually did a tiny bit of work for Marvel Comics. And, you know, and meanwhile working on, sorry?
I knew that.
I could talk about that later, I guess. And you know, and meanwhile, I've been working on this trilogy that starts with "Victory is Greater Than Death," and it's been, you know, I feel like it all kind of flows together for me. Like all the time I spend on the internet geeking out about stories, and like, you know, which I used to be my job to geek out about stories, but now I just do it kind of as a side thing, and you know, just like obsessing about what makes stories work and what's a cool story, and then meanwhile just obsessively try to create the coolest story I can. And like part of what I love about like getting to go back and forth is the kind of the conversations that you can have. Like being in a TV writer's room, you're just constantly obsessing about like minor and sometimes major plot details and how to kind of refine them and how to sharpen them and how to make them better. And meanwhile, that's kind of what we're all doing on Twitter and on, you know, in our fan fiction, in our like discussions on various places, in the podcast that I'm doing with Annalee Newitz, Our Opinions Are Correct. And, you know, part of what was fun about the run up to promoting Victory is Greater Than Death is that I wrote a series of short stories that take place before the novel. And I read from them on Instagram Live. You can actually see them on my Instagram TV. So every Saturday at noon, I would go on Instagram Live and read a brand new story about this young woman who is approached by aliens who are like, here's an alien baby. We can make it look like a human baby. We can even make it genetically appear to be your baby. Please raise this baby until she's old enough to come back to us and be a hero when she's a teenager, conveniently. And you know, so I read that. I was reading those stories every week on my Instagram Live, and it was just really fun to kind of share a new part of the world with people who, you know, maybe hadn't even gotten to read the book yet, but we were kind of like discovering the world together. And I love that you can do things like that now. You can kind of unspool things in different ways using different media. And I think that it's a really neat part of the moment we're living in right now.
So you were sort of crowdsourcing a fandom in a certain way, right? You were like,
I mean, I hope. Yeah.
So,
I
sorry, go on.
No, you go. You go.
No, I think it's really interesting the way I think
yeah.
that the
I
internet.
wasn't saying anything.
No, but the internet makes storytelling collaborative, right? Because people are there with you on that journey.
Yeah, I definitely think that that's true. And I think that, you know, Victory is Greater Than Death in so many ways is just shaped by conversations I was having on the internet about Chosen One stories, about like chosen family, about like the ways in which we would like, you know, all of us would like to see different kinds of storytelling, and not just, you know, obviously more inclusive storytelling, which is a big thing for me, and more LGBTQ characters who get to save the galaxy and be like awesome and heroic and valiant. But also just like all the tropes that we all obsess about, like all of the kind of just pieces of storytelling that we are all kind of like constantly chewing over online. And, you know, when it came to writing this story about like a teenage girl who discovers that she's like actually the clone of an alien hero. And when she reaches maturity, when she's like 16 or 17, she's going to have to go back into space and, you know, help to save the galaxy again. And like, there were so many things about that, you know, the way I tackled that was really shaped by the kind of conversations that I was having online with people about like these kinds of heroic stories and what we craved from them, what we felt we wanted more of from them. And, you know, I think that really like, it's not the book it would have been if I'd been just sitting in a room writing it by myself. It's actually I think it's more fun and queerer and just like wilder because of those online conversations.
I think that, yeah, that's really interesting to me. I feel like we write for our fandoms, and then our fandoms start to shape us in a certain way. Our communities do. Karen, you have such a massive fandom. You are driving you're driving your work now towards new fandoms, right? Because that's the thing about new media, new platforms reach different, you know, people. I always do feel like thrillers are such a solitary, you know, you are working out that, you know, the secret behind the secret of how your plots work, but right. You are so engaged with so many people who love your stuff so dearly. How does what you do change because of how much you know now about the people who love you and what they love about what you do?
Yeah, you know, it's so different now because, I mean, One of Us's line kind of came out of nowhere, you know, for a lot of people, including me. We didn't necessarily expect it was going to be what it became. And I thought, you know, everyone sort of wondered, why did this book take off the way it did? And from what I hear from my readers, it's the characters. They just got really invested in these four people in their lives. I mean, they liked the plot, they liked the mystery, but mostly they wanted to know that these people were going to be okay. You know, what was going to happen to them in the future. And I never intended to write a sequel. I thought it would be a standalone, but there was so much pent up interest in what's next, that I did start thinking about that. And that ultimately led to One of Us is Next. So, you know, my work has absolutely been driven by the response. And even though I've written other standalone books in a totally different universe, I take that same mindset of how am I going to make my readers fall in love with these characters? And if I'm not feeling that love as I'm writing it, I know it's not going to come across to them. And I have ripped apart entire books because the characters weren't doing what I needed them to do.
Yeah, that is super interesting. I guess because part of what we're talking about is world building, right? Like these big worlds that can live in a lot of different spaces. But as my old boss from Bungie, where I worked in an incubation group, Jason Jones, used to say, characters are the handles for people to pick up a universe. I think that's really, yeah, but I think it's really true, right? So like on the one hand, we have this micro focus on these faces that we're going to attach to, but we have this massive work of building these worlds that, you know, will survive in a bunch of different media, right? Sort of a different kind of writing.
And it's been really interesting going through the adaptation process because so much has to change as you go from page to screen. And that's, you know, I get that. And the only time I really dig in is when I feel like my characters are doing things they wouldn't do. You know, that's when I'll really sit down with the producers and say, well, what about this or what about that? Because I want to maintain that emotional core of those characters because I know how much they mean to my readership.
Right. I've been, did you guys all watch Lee Bardugo's big debut yesterday?
I watched the first two. It was amazing.
But I can see, and this will connect us to you, Asha, where you can see the changes, you know, of an Archie comic to a Riverdale, or you know, like what anything must be when it becomes 2021 now, and you know, a different world, a different time, and we're reflecting sort of, you know, a different medium as well. But Asha, I'm super interested in like playing a beloved character and sort of coming to understand what people love about a character and what people love about, as Karen said, you know, like rooting for characters to survive and checking in to see, you know, these faces that I think readers and viewers become friends with in a certain way. Like, did any of that go into your brain as you set out to sort of tell your own stories and sort of, you know, rather than be the character, right, you know, create the characters yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a, right, yeah, I think that's a great question. Like, for me, it was actually a bit of a different journey because, I mean, I've been an actor for like 11 years, and my journey into birthing my book really came out of a lot of frustration for a lot of the roles that I was seeing, and I felt like I was always getting these opportunities, like I would book the role, but it never felt like the character did anything or like it had a purpose. I always felt like I was a support system or, you know, the Black best friend. And my journey into writing really grew from a frustration and just wanting to see more stories that accurately reflected the world around me. You know, I'm Jamaican. I went to Jamaica every summer when I was a child for 2 months, and I would spend time in like the countryside in the remote parts of the island where it felt like being and I couldn't even have the words to explain like all of the adventures and mysteries and things that would happen. You know, it was a completely different culture and life, and I wanted to see that in stories, not only because I felt like it needed to be seen, but because I was like, it's so interesting. How are we not telling more stories like this? You know, stories that expand beyond just being Black. It's like showing the humanity of like what people go through. So I was really driven by just painting more three-dimensional characters.
Yeah, I absolutely see that. It's something that when I grew up, I also found myself looking for, I grew up in like a strange sort of Orthodox religious community, and there were no stories like that. So I found myself reading Orthodox, like All of a Kind Family, which was a story about Orthodox Jewish family on the Lower East Side, which was nothing like the Mormon family that I had come from, but like the orthodoxy was familiar. So I do understand the idea of like sort of craving, you know, craving a story that's not there, so much so that you're driven to tell it. I think that's something a lot of us have experienced in different ways.
And I feel like, I would definitely agree with that. And, just to add to that, I just feel like the stories are interesting. I feel like there's a whole world of stories that haven't been tapped into for a lot of marginalized communities that extend beyond just how we identify or what we look like. And I wanted to bring more humanity to this coming of age category with Hurricane Summer, which is about a girl who goes to Jamaica to visit her father, her estranged father, during one of the worst hurricanes that's coming to the island. And what begins as a journey of her trying to reconcile with her father becomes so much more when he ends up leaving her and her sister in the countryside with his extended family. And so it quickly becomes a story about privilege, class, colorism, forbidden love, but most importantly, how we treat young women in society and the ways in which we shame them. I wanted to write a story that really explored that transition into womanhood, that awkward point where you're no longer a girl but not quite yet a woman, and the different ways in which the world views you and treats you. Specifically when it comes to expressing sexuality, I feel like we do a really good job at shaming women who are exploring their pleasure, and I wanted to just write a book about.
That's great. We're losing you a little bit in and out of your internet connection, in case you see the delay of people reacting to what you say.
Got it.
No, that is actually the most critical thing about. I feel like about your generation, or the sort of the news stories that are being told, is that sort of intelligence that comes from having the permission to articulate those things, which frankly, as the oldest person on this panel, is not a thing that I experienced until this decade, and spent a lot of time craving that. So it's amazing to see youth getting, starting at the place where I'm ending. I'm kind of just blown away by it. Marie, you started in games, went to fiction, wrote a fiction about a game. So the way you've consumed content has become your content, and I know how many of your stories are in the works in different ways as shows. What was it like to actually take the game world into, and you write these epic, dystopians and fantasies, right? And these larger than life true heroes journeys, but it's really interesting for you to actually sort of tie that also to a player, player hero journey. So is that just a product of the mashup of who you are and the stories, you tell in the games you play, or what's going on in your Marie brain?
Yeah, I always knew I was going to write some book about games. I didn't know it was going to be Warcross necessarily, but it was always something I was doing in my head because it's just such a big part of my identity. And, like you said, it's the content I consume has now become the content I create, and, it's a close circle just going around. But Warcross was such a different series for me to write than my others because I've written far future sci-fi like Sky Hunter and, fantasy that's kind of looking back. And the research for those is not, I wouldn't say leisurely, but, I kind of slowed down to take in the knowledge that I needed for those stories. And Warcross is near future sci-fi that's set basically 10 years from now, hypothetically. So when I started doing the research for that, speaking of writing content in a digital world, I felt the stress of keeping up with what was actually happening in our world, and it's changing day by day, the tech, and making sure that Warcross, by the time the book comes out, a year and a half, 2 years from the point that I'm writing it, all the tech wouldn't be a moot point in the story. So doing the research and putting the story together was a kind of a fascinating process of feeling like I'm on a treadmill or just racing along with the news and reality and what's happening in our world. Not just in a tech sense, but in a social sense, in a, you know, what is happening to us as people around the world as technology advances, and how do we cope with that? How do we think about ourselves in this new world where we are all connected, and what are we okay with giving up, and what are we okay sacrificing, and what makes us still human in this strange world where, you know, what exactly does it mean to be a person when we have digital personas, and what is it like to put that into a game, which is internet? So it was a lot of really interesting and fascinating and weird questions, which I know, you know, you understand so much because you're immersed in this world too. But I loved writing it. It was that, you know, that book came out in 2017, so that was kind of my catharsis book during the, you know, post 2016 era. But I had a great time writing that series.
And then you went back to sort of your epic, you know, hero's journey, you know, not the metafiction, but the fiction. Was it a relief to go back to the sort of non-meta of that? And had the meta experience then shaped, as you know, did it change things when you went back into your sort of core genre?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. With Skyhunter is truly my post-2016 series, and I can feel it on every single page of this book. Every single one of my books is a snapshot in time of who I was as a person when I wrote it, and what was happening around me, and kind of what was haunting me, and what was keeping me up at night. And, you know, with Warcross, it was all the news about VR and AR technology that was coming out that was keeping me awake. With Skyhunter, it started off as a reaction to a speech from the Democratic National Convention in 2016 when Dr. Khan was talking about his son, Humayun Khan, who was a Muslim American soldier who was killed in Iraq protecting his fellow soldiers. And it just stuck with me, and I just couldn't stop thinking about the reality that, you know, so many young people from all marginalized walks of life in our country go off to war. They give their lives to protect us, and then come back to a country that doesn't necessarily give them the respect that they deserve. And so I just couldn't stop thinking about that. And so from that was born this girl named Talon. And Talon is an elite warrior protecting a country in this futuristic, war-torn place that is full of literal monsters. And she is specially trained to defeat these monsters. And so the entire story was like my return to reacting to what was happening in the world around me, and what the world was like, what was happening to us as people. And it was my catharsis in that I felt like I had very little control sometimes over what was happening in the real world and what I could affect and what I could do. But in my books, I am God. So I can do whatever I want. I can make horrible things happen to the people I don't like, and make good things happen to the people I do, with much suffering in between. But that was kind of my way of dealing with everything. And I think that's where the story came from. And it's weird because it wasn't an easy series to write. It was really, really difficult. And sometimes I was like, why am I doing this to myself? But now that I'm on the tail end of it, I'm really proud of it.
Well, I've never read anything of yours that seemed at all like you wouldn't be really, really proud of it. So it's good to hear that it's hard for you too. Lewis. Are robots taking over our life? Are we going to be out of jobs? How long do we have? A year, 2?
Well, it's interesting. I think that I'm thinking about not robots necessarily, but AI, and how it's, you know, we're talking about the convergence of digital and how we tell stories and how people consume them. And, you know, one of the most interesting things that I've seen recently is the use of AI in sort of text generation. And the way that it's been basically trained sort of to be a super intelligence that reads everything and knows everything and then can riff on that. and how that's being used creatively. But the point I was thinking about recently was with a game called AI Dungeon. I don't know if any of you have heard of that, but it's basically where the AI is the dungeon master. So you can give it a prompt, and you can say, I want a sci-fi story or I want a fantasy story. And the reason it's so good at this, by the way, is because it reads all the fan fiction that everyone's written.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, it reads everything, but it really knows like Wikipedia and fan fiction and all the sites that collect all the information that have, all the different character types and classes and things like that. But I watch a lot of Twitch also, and some of the most entertaining sort of content, I would say, and stories that I've seen recently have been watching a group of friends on Twitch play AI Dungeon, and they all get to take turns and saying, here's what I do next, and here's what I do next. And then the AI just comes up with just the craziest scenarios. And it's a little bit like, I'll say that it's not going to take over anyone's jobs. If you're a dungeon master, you're not at risk of, your dungeon master job. And same thing for writing. It's very scattershot. Somebody actually recently wrote a book based on this called "You Look Like a Thing and I Love You." Basically, where she, I need to get her name because it's
Janelle Shane.
Yes.
Shane.
Yeah,
she's a friend of mine. I love her.
Yeah, she's done a lot of really interesting, cool stuff with visual representation and also writing. But she fed she basically said to the AI, "Come, give me some interesting pickup lines," because we've sort of run out of them.
Oh no! Oh my
and
God.
Her favorite one was "You look like a thing and I love you." But there's other ones. It's like, I love you. I don't care if you're a doggo in a trench coat, or your eyes look like two rainbows and a rainbow of eyes. I can't help but stare. So, there's something there. It's not quite right, but there's something there. So anyway, the convergence of how people are using, bringing things in from AI, from artificial intelligence, and also in games. The other point I was going to bring up that I thought was interesting, and Marie, you saying, and actually Charlie, you were also saying you're looking into different technologies and the way that they've sort of influenced us. People are so using webcams. Everybody has a webcam. And one of the most interesting games that I saw recently was called, what's it called? Before Your Eyes. It started as Close Your Eyes. But basically it's a game that is controlled completely by blinking. So and it's an amazing story by itself, but yeah, you can look around and you can control where the action happens, but every time you blink, it ends the scene and goes to the next scene. And it's a story about a child who got sick, and I won't spoil it, but with a game like that it only changes when you blink. It was so emotional and actually, interestingly, sort of played with emotion so much that it made you cry. So, and when you're crying, you're blinking a lot. So you're really trying not to blink. But anyway, I just think there's a lot of that convergence really makes things interesting.
So that's a game you found on Steam, or how would you access that?
Yeah, actually, it's a game.
This wanted to do that.
Yeah, it's on Steam. It's basically just Google Before Your Eyes. And one interesting thing about this is that the publisher, the group of it, this is the other thing that I think is amazing about today, is that you don't need a team of 200 people or 500 people to make a really interesting, compelling game. And the people that are in their garages or in their parents' basements that are really experimenting on the cutting edge of the storytelling side of things are doing some amazing things. And this is a group that was at USC in their, they were just friends there. And, it took them 10 years to finish it, but it started basically with just, some tools and some technology. And the publisher actually was Skybound Games, who is a comic books publisher. So they actually ended up picking it up, and, I don't know, I thought that was interesting too.
The Walking Dead guys.
Yeah.
That's super interesting. So I guess we don't have a super ton of time, but I want to check the audience because I forgot to check for those questions. And I'll see. Okay. These are all. Okay, there's a million of these. I guess what is your all-time favorite fictional world that you would like to see, that you would like to consume in a different format? Like, what do you wish you had in a different, you know what I mean? In a different way. What do you wish you could see that isn't there now? Anybody? Chime in.
I mean,
I'm in the middle of writing a rant about. Sorry.
Go, Charlie.
Oh, I'm in the middle of writing a rant about how I desperately need a Squirrel Girl TV show. Anyway.
You definitely miss which TV show?
I definitely need a Squirrel Girl TV show.
I need a Squirrel Girl everything and just Ryan North in my life every day. So I'm well that.
Yeah.
Asha, what would you like to see?
I can't think of anything specifically, but I definitely would just say more content coming out of the Caribbean. I feel like the Caribbean is so interesting to me. Like, I don't think people understand like the world that's buried there that doesn't often get that mainstream representation. And I think there's such fascinating stories that live there. So I think in any format, just seeing more of that.
And do you think that's driven by like a cultural collaboration or like what's the...
I think so. And I think now people are, getting more empowered on the island to create, and oftentimes there aren't resources to support, filmmakers and storytellers. But now we're seeing more of an emergence of that. And I think just for a really long time, we've seen this idea of specifically Jamaica as like, everything's Irie, no problem, come here for a vacation. And that's sort of it. When it's like, it really is, like I said, living in the countryside. It's like a magical, jungly wonderland of stories and adventures. And I just think that we're missing out so much. We're missing out on so much by not hearing more of those stories.
Oh my God, that makes me just want to pick up your book right now. What about you? You got anything? What would you like to see? Marie, Lou?
I think this has already been announced, but I really want to see the new Redwall series. I think it's going to be on Netflix because that was the series that got me into reading fantasy and science fiction as a kid, and I've never really seen I think there was like an old adaptation, but it didn't ring with me, and I don't know. I associate Redwall with like my entire journey into writerdom. So we'll see how this one turns out.
I know a lot of people who feel that way. Karen.
Yeah, I'll put a plug in for my genre. I want to see some more young adult thrillers brought to screen. Like We Were Liars was a huge inspiration for me. And it's one of those books that's now exploding because of TikTok. So it probably is in development. I'm not sure, but I would love to see that world brought on screen. Same with anything by Tiffany Jackson or Kara Thomas. I think there's just so much great suspenseful, meaningful source material out there that, might be in development, but hasn't yet made it to the screen. And I'm excited for that.
Well, I think, and also your genre in particular is so naturally conducive to the big and little screen.
Yeah, right? It's bingeable. That's the whole point of it, is that you can't put it down. Hopefully, you think one more chapter, but you keep going, and that's the same for an episode.
Right, Lewis.
I'm sort of mirroring what Asha said, that because recently I've done a lot of research about World War II in the Pacific and trying to understand the context there, and really diving deep into like the area that is called Micronesia, but talking with experts and people there, and sort of I go into my own rabbit holes of the writers and the creative people there, that and lose myself in the stories that they tell and the way they tell the stories. And one woman poet in particular had a story of about swimming with eels, because that was sort of on the island that she lived. That was her ancestry had, a close attachment with eels, but she was only half only one of her parents was from there, so she was there with them. But anyway, it was just I feel like there are just these, and the technology today is allowing it to sort of come out more, but there are just these incredible stories and people and contexts that we just have no idea about. That it's really good that those are coming out more and more. So that's to me is like, it's the world. The answer is the world that we live in now has so much that's there.
Right.
And, you know,
that a platform is suddenly giving us broad access, and that our readers can more readily be creators and see themselves as creators, and we can access those stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just
I think that's
look. Yeah.
You just have to look, right? Well, everyone I think has experienced that with Netflix and the, you know, suddenly falling down a hole where you're binging, you know, history, you know, dramas from Spain, you know, like in Spanish that you know, or like who hasn't fallen in the K-drama hole, right? Which is the place where I currently live. But I do think that access is sort of critical. Okay, really fast before we tap out, what was the book that shaped, I mean, I'm thinking of this from Redwall, but what is the book? Mine was The Dark is Rising series from Susan Cooper, as if you've ever had a conversation with me, you know. But like, what is the book that made you? Do you have one? Asha?
Yeah, I would say more recently, I've definitely had books from my childhood, but more recently, Tomi Adeyemi's Children of Blood and Bone. When I saw her headline come out, it was like 24-year-old sells book for whatever. Yeah. And I remember being like, oh my God, I want to do that. I can do that too. And I want to tell my story. And it sparked that in me. And that's why I started writing. And I just feel like I'm so passionate about breaking down that wall between what we're told we can do and what we can do, you know what I mean? Especially as creators, because I think we're often told like, you can only do one thing when really you can do whatever you want, you know?
That's amazing. That's right. Okay, Charlie?
You know, I'm going to say either The Phantom Tollbooth or A Wrinkle in Time, or actually also The Chronicles of Pride Aid. So that's 3, sorry.
Those are great. All right, Karen?
The Hunger Games, for sure. That was the book that I picked up on a whim in an airport, and it completely inspired me to start writing again, which is something I had not done since I was a teenager. So if I had not randomly picked that book up, I probably would not be an author today.
Amazing. Lewis?
I think probably The Hobbit, because it was one of the first books that I read, but it also made me think of, whenever I would look at plants or a forested area, I would just think maybe they're in there. I don't know why, but anyway, I think The Hobbit, probably.
All right, and Marie, are you going out on Redwall?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely say like a more recent one too, from my post-11-year-old days. N.K. Jemisin's The Broken Earth trilogy blew my mind when I read it. Like, there's like maybe 3 or 4 series I've read in my life where I'm like, I remember the me before this series and the me after this series.
Wow,
and that's one of them where I was like, I did not know you could tell fantasy like this. I didn't know you could make a world like this. You know, I didn't know that this kind of storytelling could exist in every way, in like the point of view, in the world building, in the characters. So anyway, that's one of those series where I'm like, I felt the ground shift, no pun intended. I felt the ground shift with me, you know, when I read that series.
That is a great note to go out on. I've used up even all the extra bonus time we had. Thank you, authors. Thank you, YALLWEST. Stick around. It's going to be a great rest of the day, and we'll see you next year in Santa Monica.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.